And,
David, long time no see.
Yeah, right.
if you guys want to talk in the chat, what I discovered is that. Oh, hold on a second. I got to mute.
I'll tell you what he was going to say. Just open another browser window, go to YouTube, sign into the stream, and then you can pop out the chat and minimize the video window if you want.
Yeah, and then you guys can also talk, answer some questions there. To your heart's content. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to day 4 of the sequestering, the quarantine. How's everybody doing?
Doing great.
We're alive.
That's
That
good.
counts.
That's good.
I keep hopping
That
state to
counts.
state so they don't find me.
Yeah, right? A
I keep
Jedi on the
hopping state to
run.
state so
A Jedi on the run. I think we've heard this story before.
Once or twice.
Mr. Kestis.
Let's see. People are starting to get into the chat. Cam Ray, how you doing? How's it going?
Hey, Cam, what's going on?
I don't know. Should I wear my glasses or no glasses? This is my Tony Stark.
Yeah, exactly.
I will opt to not wear the glasses.
It's nice to have the option.
Yeah.
Me too. I literally couldn't see the computer if I weren't wearing mine. So, alas.
Yeah, I'm what do they call it? I can't see far away, but like I can see everything close. I've got those weird
You're
like
nearsighted.
graduated like bifocals, but your head has to be like specifically looking at what it is, and it's so unnatural.
Is that one of the Sith abilities?
Yes. So how's everybody doing?
Doing great.
Good.
Yeah, doing great.
I went to the grocery store today, and it was a little odd. People were wearing gloves and masks, and I'm sitting there with my Star Wars cape on, thinking that I was the weird one. Sometimes I do wish that I can just, take my helmet and just walk around Jewel or Albertsons, depending on what part of the country you're on.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
It's
for
the
sure.
Stormtrooper helmet with the cape
there you go.
that they're looking at.
That would be a little weird. So we got a couple of things that right off the bat we can talk about. I think during the planning of our little hangout tonight, some supposed news came out, and I don't know how official it is, but we can definitely talk about that rumor. And I think that story kind of has been circulating for the last, year and a half, almost 2 years?
Yeah, at least.
Yeah.
I just remember, everybody just being gung-ho about Rosario Dawson being Ahsoka, and we'll see what happens. But let's start with David. David, what do you think of those stories? Hold on a second. We got Charles coming into the chat as well. Charles, how's it going?
Hey, Charles.
Fantastic.
Excellent. Thank you for joining us here on the Scare of Scuttlebutt podcast. I was just about to ask David if what his thoughts are on the rumor. Again, we're hearing this once again regarding Rosario Dawson as Ahsoka Tano. We can kind of start with that right off the bat. We don't waste any time here on the Scuttlebutt podcast. David, your thoughts?
Well, going back to, I think 2017 was when we first heard about these. I think it was a fan casting that they wanted Rosario Dawson to play Ahsoka, and she was up for it. I know she wrote on Twitter that she would love to do it. I know the guys from the Force Cast posted a tweet today that showed Dave Filoni's last 3 likes for the past 3 years on Twitter, and one of them was Rosario Dawson's tweet about playing Ahsoka. So if you want to read into that, go ahead. But I mean, she looks the part. I feel like it's good to have somebody who really wants to play the character. I've seen people say, "Oh, well, they can do what they did with Ray Park in Solo, have him play the character, but have Sam Witwer's voice dubbed over it." I just don't know if that would work because a lot of the shots for Darth Maul in Solo, they were very far away. When he spoke, the camera didn't stay on him too long. If you do that with Ahsoka, she's going to have a lot of screen time. She's going to have a lot of close-up shots, and I just don't think it would flow well. So if it's Rosario Dawson, it has to be Rosario Dawson the entire way through. We'll always have Ashley Eckstein. She will always be Ahsoka. But in this live-action world, sometimes you just have to take a risk like that and just hope that everybody else comes on board. But yeah, I'm totally up for it if that's what's going to happen in season 2.
What if they see Ahsoka also through kind of like a hologram, just like similar to Darth Maul, where you can at least maybe try and do what you said and do the dubbing, so it's not so clear. It's not like an actual shot of her,
Right?
but you can see a little bit of the the scan lines. I think that might work, especially if you're gonna. I can't see them introducing Ahsoka Tano like full force, just like that in season 2. Maybe slowly start to bring her in.
Yeah, I could see them doing that for sure.
Andrew, Marisha, what do you guys think of that? There's just the aspect of bringing her in live action. I know they stopped or they're done shooting it, so obviously,
Right.
I guess. Yeah, I guess my question is like, how much would they really bring the character in for? I mean, there's no guarantee that this isn't, a single episode at the end of the season of finding a teacher for the child. There's no guarantee. We don't even have confirmation, even if these rumors are true, that Ahsoka's really back, because we know her, and during this, or at least just prior to this time, that Ahsoka and Sabine are off on their quest to find Ezra. So the hologram idea might be a legit concept.
I mean, she's such a potentially show-stealing character for like longstanding fans. I don't know that they want to bring in a character that is going to garner that much attention away from the main story.
Right. It's the same issue that you run into with trying to do a sequel trilogy about new characters, but you want to have Luke and Han and Leia, and every time they're on screen, they steal it.
Sure. Yeah. Charles, what do you think?
I think it's fascinating. If it's actually true, and she is in there, I think that the potential for derailment, like everyone else has said, is pretty strong. But if she comes in as a end of season, last episode, almost cameo, that will also allow for the story of her and Sabine, who left together to go find Ezra, give that arc a chance to live a bit more and give some mystery to it, but also bring her character in a live action series back into people who don't probably have that much experience with. So it'll be fascinating to see how much screen time she actually gets. But if that's the way it happens, it'd be extremely exciting to see.
Yeah, all good ideas and good concepts. Rob, you're quiet over there with your adult beverage. What do you think?
If they do it, I'm moving to Canada. Actually, I'm not going to move to Canada. Charles told me that that's a bad idea, but I don't know. I love Ahsoka's character so much, and again, I guess it's maybe not on the same level as the Solo film, where Alden Ehrenreich came in and had to kind of fill the shoes of Harrison Ford. Not quite on that level, but certainly the people that love Ahsoka have very strong feelings, about that love. And I think that a live action version, someone would have to come in and nail it. I do agree. If it happens, it has to be very short and very targeted. But again, kind of like Andrew was saying, at least based on the timeline, I do believe she's supposed to be kind of off in the unknowns, trying to track down where Ezra is with Sabine. So it could be a holocron. It could be, some sort of a transmission that they pick up. There's ways that they could bring her in without having her come in and quote unquote steal the show. But I've got my ideas about kind of where she's off where if they're going to find Ezra, where they're going to find Ezra. And I'd hate to have any of that ruined just for the sake of having her show up in the show.
Sure. Yeah. I was talking to, I forgot, I think we were in a group chat or I was talking to some other buddies, but I was mentioning to everybody that having kind of I don't know if she's an A-list, but having a really popular actress as part of the Star Wars universe in such a big role, for me personally, it kind of like takes me out of it. I liked when the actors in Star Wars were kind of unknowns because you kind of like dive into that universe and dive into that world without the distraction of, oh, this is an A-list actor. What do you guys think about bringing like big time actors into Star Wars? Do you think it helps, hinders, or do you not care? Coruscant Radio, you guys are up.
I mean, I think one thing Star Wars has done for a very long time, going all the way back to the casting of Alec Guinness, is to sprinkle in well-known people. And I think that I don't see any issue. I don't want to suddenly go. I don't want to go cast. I don't want it to become like casting Batman movies in the 90s was, where it was all about who you could put in it. But I have no problem with sprinkling in some big names.
Yeah.
I think you almost need to.
And I think that's what Marvel does. I mean, Marvel, Robert Redford, these really great big names.
Mm-hmm.
And for the most part, I think sometimes it's weird though, because they are different animals, the Marvel movies and the Star Wars movies. But for me, because of what flows in my veins, which is Star Wars, it's, to me, I joke around with my friends. I think Star Wars is like a documentary, and it actually happened. It's so, yeah, it's so close to my heart that when I see like actors, I'm like, no, okay. Obviously I know it's a movie, but it's just, for me, it's like something a lot more special. And not that it bothers me that I see A-list actors in Star Wars, but it just depends on how they're used. Like Max, what's his name? Max von Sydow, rest his soul. He was an amazing addition to The Force Awakens. I wish we saw a little bit more of him. He's an incredible actor, and I wish we had a chance to flesh that aspect of his character and whatever story that he was part of, a little more. But I'm kind of on the fence when it comes to bringing these A-list actors into Star Wars.
You do get a little bit more of it. Oh yeah, I agree. And you do get a little bit more of the Max von Sydow, Laura Santucci character in the Kylo Ren comics as well.
Yeah, but I want to see him. I want to see him and actors like him in the role, like in the films, because they are so powerful. Just seeing these actors on screen, like, just recently I was talking to another group, seeing Patrick Stewart back as Picard. There's just like something special about that, that is really, it's really unique. Especially after all these years, if you bring in, these older actors like Andrew, you were saying you've got, you want to bring in a new Star Wars, but then you also want to see Han and Luke and Leia. They definitely steal the show because of the history and the baggage that they bring to the films.
Mm-hmm.
If you look if you look at Ming-Na Wen, who played the bounty hunter in the Mandalorian episode, I mean, she's got a cinematic history to her, but her acting career sort of took second place to the character she was playing. And Rosario Dawson for sure has a storied past as well. But for the character, especially when you consider the amount of people who have used and seen Mandalorian as a first step into Star Wars, like when we went to our con this past weekend, there was so many people who were casual fans of Star Wars, but saw Mandalorian for the first time as their first experience for Star Wars.
Mm-hmm.
The actors themselves were almost secondary to the lore that you were being pulled into. And unless you were very specifically following the actors who were playing those roles, you had no clue about, they had no clue about their history, the baggage they may have brought in, and kept them distanced from the character and the story that they were trying to tell. So, I've seen Rosario Dawson in many movies, but I can probably distance myself from what she's done in the past, especially if her appearance as Ahsoka comes in. It'll be minimized by the small part of the story that she's actually going to play.
How bad does Ming-Na Wen have to feel about being killed off by a piece of poodoo like Jake Cannavale with his illustrious acting abilities?
I was sad. When she died that fast.
He was a bit deeper than everyone gives him credit for. He was he had a few layers to him,
like onions.
Yeah.
Everybody loves
Gooders.
Coffee.
So, are you guys caught up on Clone Wars? I have not seen this week's Ahsoka episode.
Same here.
But nobody.
Nope.
I've got kids.
We
saw
watched
it.
it.
We watched it.
Yeah, I saw it.
I have not seen it.
I wanted to, but I didn't get a chance to. And obviously, Ahsoka Tano is a great character. David, was it with you last time we hung out? We were talking about. It doesn't seem like she was really gone because obviously she's in the books and she's in some other episodes. But what a trajectory for her character. I mean, from the Clone Wars movie that came out a few years ago, she was a whiny little teenage brat and nobody liked her. And let's talk a little bit about her trajectory as a character and how powerful the writing of the stories were that changed all that. She was the Jar Jar Binks of her time. Nobody liked her. But now, I mean, including me, now she's probably like in the top 4 characters of Star Wars, of all, favorite of mine. What do you guys think of that? Charles, what did you think of Ahsoka when you first saw her?
I first saw her in the Clone Wars movie, and Pat will tell you that I fell asleep at that first movie. So I completely relate to that as an annoying teenager, but as a character arc, you saw her growth. And I for myself, I tolerated her for the point of like, okay, where is this going to go? I did not see her in Attack of the Clones. I didn't see her in Revenge of the Sith. How is this going to play out? And as she matured and as she, I guess, sort of calmed down, the different types of challenges that her character faced gave her more depth. And by the end of her arc within the Clone Wars, I was like, no, I mean, I don't want to see her leave. Obviously, it made sense because you didn't see her in this Revenge of the Sith. It was the biggest part of the change within that series that I was most anxious to see how it was going to play out. So it was a fascinating transition from, whatever, I don't want to see her again, to how can she leave this series? She's a massively important character.
Yeah. Rob, I know we had our discussions about Ahsoka Tano. What'd you think?
I mean, for me, she's one of the most complex characters that they have developed throughout all the Star Wars series. I think that she was certainly
how wild
annoying.
is it that that she came from a cartoon, from like a kid's show?
Right. No, and I love it. I understand the feelings of many people about the Clone Wars movie, and I agree with a lot of them. I think though that they did a great job of establishing very quickly that it was a genius move on the part of Yoda to kind of make her Anakin's Padawan, because she was so much like him, so impulsive, so kind of ready to go off and do whatever occurred to her at the time without really worrying about the consequences. And so kind of as their relationship developed, Anakin was obviously having to learn to deal with his frustration at the fact that he was always telling her kind of do what I say, not what I do. And not really how she was wired, but they kind of get to that point there where they diverge, where Ahsoka ends up making the hard decisions that had Anakin been able to make those same decisions, he would have very much stayed a champion of the light. And her departure from the Jedi Order, kind of at the end of the season 5 of the Clone Wars, was one of those kind of the three legs that were holding Anakin up. I mean, he lost his mother, he lost Ahsoka, and then the final straw was Padme. So those were kind of the trinity of women that he really was being held up by, and that precipitated his fall to the dark side. So I'd say she's an incredibly important character, and the fact that she, in Rebels, is constantly seen in company of that convor, which I mentioned the other night when we were on the podcast or the live stream with David. Despite the fact I know Trevor, not the hugest fan of that particular trilogy, but they did some interesting things with Ahsoka. I would love to see more of her story. I just don't know if The Mandalorian's the place that I want to see it.
Yeah, and now that isn't Dave Filoni didn't they were going to do a sequel to Rebels where we
There's a rumor.
Yeah, there's a rumor.
Nothing confirmed, but there's some
I
rumors.
hadn't heard that.
Yeah. And really, I'm not sure if Dave Filoni is going to have time unless he kind of leaves Mandalorian, in Favreau's hands, so he can kind of do two things at once. But Rob, it's always been an interesting theory that you pose regarding the trinity, I guess, of characters that affected Anakin Skywalker and his fall from grace, rise to the dark side. Ashley has always been a really great ambassador, Star Wars ambassador for fans. Her and what's his name, Ray Parks. They've been really fantastic with fans on their social media pages, and obviously, they're a huge part of Star Wars. But how crazy is it to think that this character really had some sort of intake as far as how Anakin Skywalker, aka Darth Vader, turned out to be. It's just a crazy thing. David, you want to talk a little bit about how it's just interesting to me how after all these years we're still talking about this film back in 1977. We're still learning new things, and obviously I know the behind the scenes where you kind of create these story arcs, but a lot of this stuff really seems to fit. There's some that don't, but for the most part, a lot of this stuff kind of fits really nicely in a puzzle to be able to expand the franchise forward and keep it alive. David, can you talk a little bit about some of the new elements in Star Wars that have affected the original trilogy in a profound way? It's a deep subject, but it's something that I think is really cool as a fan.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the first one you really have to look at that really affects the original trilogy is Rogue One. Just those characters, the story, how organically it felt. We always made those jokes about, how were they so stupid to miss that flaw in the Death Star? Now we know it was on purpose. It was put there for a reason in order to help the rebels eventually destroy it. Then you have a character like Cassian really delving into the gray area of war. The rebels are no longer painted as the black and white. We're the good guys. We're going to just do things the right way every time. No, we're going to, unfortunately, there's an informant. He's going to give us away. I have to kill him. That's just the reality of war sometimes. It's always great when you see the scene where Jyn is about to go. It was after her speech, and then Cassian and all the rebel fighters start rallying around her, and they're like, look, we've all done things we're not proud of, assassins, saboteurs, and all this stuff. So I really like how they went all in for the war aspect. I also really liked the emotional impact that movie had, and also just the fact that there was no mystery. We weren't wondering who Jin's parents were. We weren't wondering, where these characters really came from. It was just, these were my parents. This is what happened. Here are these other people who want to be on the right side of things, and this is their story. And there's a self-contained story. We're not wondering what happened after. And again, here you had star power in this movie. You had Forrest Whitaker, you had Mads Mikkelsen, you had Krennic. Oh shoot, well, I'm blanking on his name.
Ben
I'm sorry?
Mendelsohn.
Yes,
Ben
there you
Mendelsohn.
go, Ben Mendelsohn, and Felicity Jones, and all these great actors. That once you watch the movie, you forget that they're actors you've seen in many other things. They're just embodying these characters. And now we're lucky to get Cassian. We're lucky to get, hopefully, just other stories within this time period. But yeah, I think Rogue One specifically and Rebels, obviously, that show really did a lot for that era. But yeah, I'll say Rogue One is the one that really definitively tied just that whole era together, and then just took everything to the next level.
David, you mentioned that part towards the beginning of Rogue One where Cassian kills the informant. Right off the bat, I thought that was a gutsy move by the filmmakers. It really showed, kind of the sacrifices in war. I mean, he didn't want to get ratted on, and he had to protect his cover. And I think it's something that we've not seen in Star Wars before. Even the original trilogy, you got the good guys and the bad guys, like you said. Everything was pretty well defined. But in Rogue One, they really took that, I guess, duality of conscience in a whole new, different direction. And I think that was great. I think. I'm really excited to see what Cassian, the show, has in store. But Marisha and Andrew, what do you guys think about how some of that old stuff is kind of being not rewritten, but just really, we're seeing it from with new eyes.
We're changing the perspective a little bit.
Yeah.
It's always interesting, to go back to read books, or even Rebels kind of went back and sort of filled in some gaps, gaps that, we weren't necessarily like sitting around like, ooh, what's happening with all these people? But, you're seeing Bail Organa, you're seeing Leia as a senator. And so I think on the whole, I think they've done a really good job going in. I think it's always dangerous going in and like placing a story within something that it already exists, like especially the original trilogy, going in and telling stories during that time is always a little scary, or right before it. But I think, Rogue One, I think, is the most obvious example. But I think that Rebels also did a really great job. I didn't love as much Resistance, when they kind of went back in and, kind of told different sides of the story. I mean, it's valid, I guess, but I didn't think that it really added as much depth to the story.
Yeah, but it's the same thing you see with novels, where we get new little pieces of people's stories, and it helps to round out the universe and make it feel more immersive, more real, when you know little things about people's past.
You're not just hearing the perspective from like the most important people. You're not just you're seeing how it affects everybody else. And, as everybody else, that's always kind of interesting to see.
Resistance had the problem of Niku being the Jar Jar Binks of that series, right?
My 5-year-old thought he was great.
I don't know. I kind of felt like the main character was a little bit of the Jar Jar Binks.
Trust me, they were all a little bit of a Jar Jar Binks. And I feel bad for Mod Best. But anyway,
but granted, that show is obviously geared towards a very young audience, and probably younger audience than Rebels was when that first started.
And Phantom Menace.
I agree with that. However, we've got a 5-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 10-year-old who all much prefer Rebels or Clone Wars to anything done in Resistance.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it's interesting because I have a 15-year-old who kind of got back into Resistance after leaving it for a while. He all of a sudden expressed interest of going back, and we've been watching the last season, the last couple of nights. So
that's fun.
I've always said that Resistance has obviously childlike features, but when you pull that back, and really kind of get into the story. I think they're doing some interesting things, especially early on, even when the story was going concurrently with the events of the Force Awakens, and obviously the character developments between the I can't remember all the characters' names, but the young lady that joined the First Order, and I guess her exploration of self. And really, I mean, Star Wars is a lot there's a lot of that in Star Wars, just the exploration of self and trying to figure out who you are, and your growth as a character, as a person. And I think those are the very core elements of why I enjoy Star Wars, and I know a lot of people do the same.
Yeah, well, there's some good stuff in Resistance. It just
Especially the
never
second
really got
season.
traction like the other series had a chance to do.
Yeah. And I think that's probably because I wonder if, I think early on people were expecting Dave Filoni to be like 100% in on that as far as executive producing. I think he's there in name only and kind of supervising. Because of that, I don't feel that they initially planned on having that be such a long run. Obviously, everything was in flux. This was pre Disney Plus. So there was a lot of behind the scenes stuff kind of going on and still trying to figure out. But sometimes it's better to quit while you're ahead and start something new. And I hope the advent of these new shows that are coming up on Disney Plus, Obi-Wan and Cassian, I think I think those shows are going to be fantastic.
I do have to say, since Cassian and K2SO are such popular characters, and I know there's a few people I'm looking at here on the screen who this is probably not news to, but if you ever get a chance to go to the Void and do Secrets of the Empire down at Disney Springs or anywhere else where they've got a Void location where they're playing that particular episode, whatever you want to call it, definitely go do that. You definitely get a little bit of additional time with those two characters, and it's a great VR experience too.
Yeah, totally.
Awesome.
Waiting on my check from Disney for that.
So speaking of Disney, I know, Rob, you recently visited one of the theme parks, and David, you're smack in the middle of that world.
Oh yeah.
Let's start with David. What and I've seen the videos of the Resistance ride. It's just phenomenal. What can you tell us about that experience, David?
Oh man. Well, without spoiling anything, it is literally unlike any attraction you've ever been on. I know a lot of people say that the Flight of Passage ride in the Pandora area of Animal Kingdom is fantastic, and it is. But Rise of the Resistance just takes it to a whole other level because of the sheer scale of it, the commitment of the cast members to like really embody these First Order officers, and just the way that the ride is, just the trackless system. First of all, they'd never done a ride like that. I think the only other one that they had was the Ratatouille ride over in Disneyland Paris, which is the same kind of track system. But yeah, without spoiling it too much, it's like a 3-part ride. You have the beginning when you leave the planet, then you get captured by the First Order, and then you're in the ride. And that's really all you can say, because if you describe it further than that, then you're really just ruining the experience. I will tell you that if you haven't been yet, pretty much put this at the top of your list. I went on December 7th, 2 days after it opened. Got to the park at 4:45 in the morning, waited in line. I was boarding group number 16. Wow. And the ride broke down twice, and then finally the third time we got to experience the whole thing. And I'll tell you, after a 7-hour wait, I had no issue waiting that long after I got off that ride. And usually for a ride, I'd be like, I just wasted the entire day. But that one, honestly, if they get to the point where they can have a standby line, and if that thing says 300 minutes, wait in line for it. That's how good it is. That's how good it is. Yeah.
Yep.
Carl is asking if anybody's got any tips for waiting in that line. You just wait, man.
Yeah, you just wait.
No.
That queue is so immersive.
Well, yeah. Wait when they allow standby, but
Yeah.
like queuing for it with the virtual queue right now. Clearly the key is you got to be there before park opening. You want to get yourself in an area. If you have enough cell signal where you don't need the Disney Wi-Fi, definitely don't be on the Disney Wi-Fi. If you have to be on the Disney Wi-Fi, kind of get there early enough to try different locations. You don't want to be up by the main gate because the signal's a little bit weaker there. So make sure you have good signal. Then when you get the app open, there's a find out more kind of under Rise of the Resistance, which will take you to the screen that has the two options, one for check your status, which you need to have a boarding group for, or to join a boarding group. So you just kind of bounce back and forth between those two screens until the join boarding group lights up at usually it's a minute or two before 8 o'clock, depending on how your clock is synced. And then you just grab that boarding group as soon as you can. It's kind of a crapshoot. I know people who are standing right next to someone. Someone might get boarding group 18. You might get boarding group 86.
Yeah.
But there's Disboards has a really good thread on it that will tell you like how many boarding groups they're boarding per day, kind of what your expectation should be. Some days they can get through like 100, like high hundreds of boarding groups, 170, 180 boarding groups. Other times it can only get to 70 or 80 boarding groups, depending on how many damages the ride has. But it's just kind of a crapshoot. But you know, the thing is you want to plan for it earlier in your trip, especially if you're on a multi-day trip, so that if you do run into an issue with the technology or whatever, you have the opportunity to go back at least a time or two to try it.
Yeah.
But don't give up. It's the great thing about the virtual queue is even if you get 100+ boarding group and you're in a standby group, you can go off and do other things. And you can watch throughout the day to see what your boarding group's going to be. And how close they're getting to that, and you can kind of time your return to the park based on that. So there's pros and cons to it. I know a lot of families with small kids getting up that early can be a problem. I'm sure it'll kind of work out in time.
Yeah.
Plus, the coronavirus kind of screwed things up for a lot of people.
Yeah. If you go right now, you get really close to the front of the line.
You just won't get in.
What I will say is if you head on over to Hollywood Studios here at Disney World, there's a great bar. I think it's the Baseline Tap House. It's right outside Galaxy's Edge.
Yes.
If you have a lot of time to kill, go over there, get the pretzel, get that board. It is amazing. It's amazing.
Nice.
You can also just eat Ronto wraps till you can't stand up.
I was gonna say if he's gonna say Ronto wraps during this, I'm gonna kill him.
Absolutely. Everyone drinks. I said Ronto wraps, everyone drinks.
We Pat and I had an 8-hour wait between our boarding group from 0 to 89. We went from Galaxy's Edge to Epcot and back, and we didn't miss a minute. It was immersive. It was fantastic in the sense that we had interactions with the characters in Galaxy's Edge and Batuu, with Chewie, with Vi, with all of them, and it was fantastic. With Rey, they all came up to us, and the time flew. So if you're a Star Wars fan, even if you have a late boarding group, and we were worried by about 5:30 with our boarding group not making it, the cast members who were just simply working the line and keeping people in queue were also in character, and it was 100% worth it. They work extremely hard to make each and every experience a lifelong memory, and it's 100% worth it.
Oh yeah,
that's cool. That's cool.
I will say that I've had the opportunity to be at Galaxy's Edge on both coasts. I'm very fortunate in that way. When I was out at Disneyland, they didn't have Rise open at that point. But experiencing Rise of the Resistance at Walt Disney World, we went over Christmas, so the parks were a little bit busier. I think the day that we did it via the virtual queue, the park opened at 6 a.m. So we were in line really early. I was sick. I was like, it was raining outside. It was still a little bit cool. I'm like, we're doing this. I'm gonna I'm going to get on this one way or the other. So we ended up getting, I think it was like boarding group 37 or 38, which still boarded by 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning.
Nice.
Christmas, they were really getting a lot of people through. The first time I went through it, there were a couple of the animatronics that weren't working properly, which if you didn't know what the ride, in A mode was like, you would have never noticed because they had a B mode that was equally impressive.
Mhm.
But the crazy thing about that, I mean, Disney is famous for their animatronics and characters that move, like the Hondo Onaka on Smuggler's Run. He moves in a way that people think that it's an actual actor up there.
Yeah.
I would say that Rise of the Resistance, the animatronics aren't that level good, but that's not what makes that ride in the first place. It is the hologram. There's a hologram that is just mind blowing. It's not quite life size, but I mean, you look at it and you can't understand how they do it.
Yeah.
And there's some other features on that ride that it just blows your mind. The Rebel transport you get on, there's a twist to that that I'm not going to go into, but it is so funny. People assume certain things and they go to one side or the other of the transport thinking that they're going to get off, and many of them are surprised. So, but to the point that David was making about the cast members and how much they bring to that attraction, and it's the Resistance members as well as the First Order. The Resistance members are rushing you out to get on this transport, and I saw people who did not look like they were prone to doing a lot of running, starting to run. I mean, and they're cute to look at. I'm talking about me basically, but no, I wouldn't run from someone with a chainsaw. But the great thing about the First Order cast members is this is like the Disney dream job, right? You get to play a role where you can be quote unquote disrespectful to the guests. Don't lean on that.
Yep.
They get to be the epitome of First Order. You see guests leaning against the wall, pushing buttons, and they're snapping at them. And grown adults are like jerking back in surprise, and small children are starting to get scared. And then the cast member will kind of come over and be like, "This is all fake, don't worry about it." But so there's a lot of fun to be had on that attraction. I know that John Sakari, Big Fat Panda, had posted on social media that one of the First Order officers had said, you should all be standing on your color. And she looks at him and goes, "Is that clear?" And he goes, "No, I'm actually on silver." So he got a dirty look from the First Order cast member there. So, but it's the trackless ride vehicles are crazy. Being in a room with full size AT-ATs will just blow your mind.
Mhm.
And it's just, you get people, everyone who gets off the ride is cheering.
Yeah.
We're talking about how crazy that was, and that is the biggest testament, I think, to something that a lot of people have probably already seen on YouTube, which doesn't do it justice.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's the first time I saw. I think somebody had posted their vacation video, and they ran through the entire the entire ride. David, you guys were you were talking about how it's a trackless ride. I saw a little bit of that, and that shot of like Rob mentioned, just getting into that hangar bay and seeing that that AT-AT, it must be mind blowing, especially to fans. Star Wars has always been on the forefront of technology, and if anybody knows me, that's one of the reasons that I love Star Wars, is because of all the behind the scenes stuff that has gone on. Talk a little bit about Star Wars and Star Wars technology as far as the rides. David, you're very familiar with this, being at the epicenter. What is the biggest difference between this ride, this theme park, that's different than any of the other theme parks out there?
I mean, just the fact that it is an actual living, breathing extension of a world that you know. I know we can look at the launch bay at Hollywood Studios and over at Disneyland, and it's all the props of the movies. You get to take a picture with Darth Vader, Kylo Ren, and a couple of the other characters. But when you step into Batuu, the sounds, the smells, the in-universe, the language, when you pay for something, you're not paying in dollars, you're paying in credits. When you the utensils, the plates, everything just feels like you're there. You know, we were having a discussion of on Wednesday whether or not they would ever feel a little, you know, handcuffed in what they were able to do with the land. And after that conversation we had, it's like this place can live on in this time period for as long as they want. You have the staple of the Falcon. You have the staple of Rise of the Resistance. And then just the other experiences you have of building a droid, building your own lightsaber, going into Doc Ondars and looking at all those antiques and things you can buy. You look at the other parks and they're theme parks. This one, it's like you're on a Star Wars planet. You're there. You're with the characters. You're basically living out your own Star Wars story. And whenever they finish the hotel, that's going to be just an even bigger extension of that. And I know I check those job postings every day. If the only one I've seen is a general manager of the Star Cruiser. That's the only job posting I've seen. But yeah, when that thing's over and completed, it's a 2-night stay, and you're in it
for $7 million.
Yeah, right. Whoever can afford that thing,
it's a little low, but
right, seriously. But yeah, it's just incredible. It really is incredible.
Wow. And Andrew, Marisha, you have kids. When are you guys heading out there?
Whenever we can afford to.
I don't know.
We have kids. See, we have 3 kids. So somehow, like, the more kids you have, the less feasible Disney World becomes. We did it a few years ago.
It should be the other way around, right?
Right. Yes.
Yeah, we went during Celebration last time. It was in Orlando, but we had kind of initially talked about going back this fall, but that was before Celebration got planned on the other coast. We tried to make plans for that, couldn't work it out, but now we're just going to kind of wait. Now we're kind of in wait and see mode on when to go, because I mean everything's kind of up in the air right now.
You got to sign up for Mandalorian daycare. He'll carbon freeze your kids, and then you guys can just go. I got to give Pat from Conversations total credit for this. He brought it up on our review show, but it is a genius idea. I mean, I don't understand why he keeps leaving the child / baby Yoda on the ship without just carbon freezing him.
Because he doesn't want to have to deal with the hibernation sickness.
Yeah.
Nobody, have you ever dealt with a sick kid? That ain't fun. Don't nobody want to deal with a hibernation sick green alien?
This kid never has grief left. Yoda's species is immune to carbon freeze sickness.
So what other Star Wars rumors have you guys heard? I know there's all sorts of websites, all sorts of rumors, all over the place. Obviously now we're dealing with Rosario Dawson. Hasn't come officially from the Star Wars site, but what else is out there as far as Star Wars rumors?
I saw today where Kevin Smith actually retweeted the story about Rosario Dawson and said that he was ecstatic to see that her dream had finally come true, and that he thanked Dave Filoni as an through Twitter and Star Wars for making her dream come true. So is that an endorsement? I don't know, but he's pretty high placed in the sense that if he's looking at it and he's retweeting it, there might be some weight to that. That was pretty cool to see.
Interesting, yeah. Anybody else? Rumors?
Let me check.
I hadn't heard a lot of new stuff here
No.
lately. I think so much is kind of everybody's kind of holding their breath on, these TV shows were both prepping to go into, prepping to start production. And I suspect Cassian is on indefinite hold before they start now. And probably Obi-Wan as well. And I'm not sure how far along they were with The Mandalorian.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of wonder that greenlit or that rumor about that animated series, if we might not see an acceleration of progress on that to crank something out, since those guys don't necessarily have to work in close quarters.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So season 2 of The Mandalorian is wrapped.
Is it wrapped?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
According to Gina Carano,
Okay.
and I'm not arguing with her, so
No, don't argue with her.
if you want to. Again, I was on a podcast at one point, and she was referred to as arm candy, and I flinched.
Armbar candy.
Right. Exactly.
Armbar candy that
Armbar.
can break all your bones.
Exactly.
Exactly. Yeah.
Um,
So, what do you guys think of? Did they release some new episodes of what is that? Galaxy Adventures? Galaxy of Adventures?
Yeah.
They did.
it did.
Yeah, I think they dropped 3 new episodes, maybe.
I don't know. I was like deathly ill in the bed when that happened, so I think you watched them.
I love
They
the
sounded cool.
animation style. Yeah, they take audio from the original trilogy or the movies, and then do animations after on top of that. But it looks pretty cool, and I know people have been kind of asking for like full-fledged series in that animation style, which I don't think it's too far off from the animation style of Resistance. It looks very two-dimensional as far as animation goes, not as 3D as Rebels or Clone Wars.
It's more. I think it's more along the lines of the holiday special.
Oh,
don't
yeah,
have
yeah. Right. The Boba Fett animation, all that stuff.
Right.
But,
Luke Skywalker, the Iron Jaw.
yeah, I mean, those are cool for what they are, and I know a lot of people enjoy it. There's been a little bit of a controversy early on, but they're pretty cool, I think.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Oh. And whenever they said that they were going to do, when they said they were going to do Rebels, really anime style, that's what I envisioned. Because like
Resistance?
a lot of that's what I'm sorry, Resistance. Because a lot of like that, the action shots have real kind of anime sort of styles, and it's pretty
like
cool.
The speed wishes and kind of the camera angles that kind of like swirl around the character. Yeah. So, what are you guys hoping to see in season 2 of The Mandalorian, Charles?
Well, with the announcement, of course, of Ahsoka, that would be kind of cool. But I think that the mystery of Yoda's, well, not Baby Yoda, but Yoda and his history still remaining a mystery. I think that the huge effort to keep his background sort of nebulous and that's not necessarily defined helps with his masterful wielding of the Force. And if he can keep that relatively quiet, and maybe we can have a planet that is not going to be too defined, but still give a little bit of information. I would love that to be the driving force behind the arc, not necessarily giving too much away, but giving enough that the series is continues that way. But beyond that, if Gina Carano comes back and has some sort of secondary plot that she can help the Mandalorian with it, I'd love that as well. But not too much where we give too much away, the mystery and the mystique behind Yoda.
It's interesting. What if we never find out? What if they kind of keep that a mystery like throughout the whole series, and maybe we do get a little tidbit here and there, but what if that mystery is never solved?
That totally fine, 100% fine.
I think that should be expected.
Yeah.
And how interesting would the fan reaction be if they did kind of spill the beans and this is where Yoda's from and this is his species? Do you think that would have a fan backlash as far as the reaction to Yoda's characters? Marisha, you think so? Why?
I think so. I think a lot of people really like Yoda being mysterious. And I think if they'd like give us a whole ton of information about Yoda's species, I'm staying off Twitter for the next week.
Not long enough, by the way.
Right,
True.
yeah.
I will say that, Ro, after you left David's live stream the other night, we did have a conversation about this, and there was some talk about how the High Republic might be the chance for them to show how a 400-year-old Yoda in Yaddle might have got it on, but producing Baby Yoda. So definitely go check out the Followers of the Force.
That was a fun discussion.
3 hours of ridiculousness.
Yeah.
I wasn't involved with any of that conversation, so
Me neither.
Yep.
Yeah. I'm absolving any involvement in that.
And I can't picture any of them during that broadcast talking about
No.
that. Like, can you picture Trevor talking about Yoda and Yiddle getting it on? I can't.
No.
He was
Trevor
the
was,
most against it.
Trevor just looked disapprovingly at me when I brought up the Mortis trilogy. Park.
You and your Mortis trilogy and your
I
Ronto.
love me some Mortis
Hey, I'm with you on that.
And
Yeah.
poutine.
and poutine.
You know, it's interesting. You know, getting back to since you guys brought it up, the Mortis arc. You know, a while ago we had an episode where we, Rob, we were talking about Clone Wars, and then we kind of snuck in the Mortis arc. We talked about it with Trevor. He wasn't that big of a fan. He basically said if you took those episodes out, nothing would, it wouldn't affect anything. We gave him a little bit of a pushback, obviously. I know Alex was also kind of relieved to hear somebody else, say that they really didn't enjoy the Mortis arc. It was confusing. It was too cerebral, or just that it wasn't that big a deal or as much as a deal that people were making it out to be. But there's some really incredibly deep stuff in that arc that I think people really should pay attention to, especially now. We'll see what happens with Ahsoka going forward, but it really has some really deep implications, as we saw, especially with Rebels and World Between Worlds.
Right.
I posed a question a while ago regarding time travel in Star Wars, and a lot of people pushed back, claiming that, leave time travel in Star Trek. Star Wars will be a little confusing if time travel came into play. And I can kind of see that argument, but one of the things that that Rebels episode kind of showed me that it really wasn't your traditional time travel where you get into the Enterprise and whip around the sun and you're back in San Francisco saving whales. Sorry, Marisha, if that's a spoiler. I know you're.
I already watched that one.
Okay,
But
Computer.
it's definitely one of those concepts, I guess, that would be very interesting, to me to kind of explore, especially in Star Wars. I was talking to a couple of friends of mine regarding, introducing that story arc in Episode 9, where we see Palpatine use that, because obviously in Rebels we know that he kind of played around in that realm and was kind of, mixing around in that the pot, whatever, and he was able to see that realm. What's to say that Palpatine didn't kind of, in the decades between those two films, really didn't kind of not just master it, but just kind of play around and was able to pull himself out from the past and exist in the future that we know of for Rise of Skywalker. Getting back to that old discussion about the danger of alienating casual fans from hardcore fans like ourselves. Obviously, we all have podcasts. We all talk about Star Wars day in and day out and kind of understand the ins and outs. But what do you guys think about that aspect of the fandom? There's obviously two camps: the casual fans that love the movies, and the nerds like us that are really, our pores are really in this whole fandom. What do you guys think about, introducing some of those elements into the mainstream? Does it? Do you think it'll confuse folks? David, let's start with you.
I think it could, just because nobody's seen it before. It's kind of, you can point somebody to, oh, just watch Rebels and this is how it works. I always liken it to Solo when we saw Darth Maul again. I heard a lot of people in the theater, wait, he's dead. It's
Right.
like, yeah, if you didn't watch the Clone Wars, and you also don't want to be that person like, oh, well, if you watch the animated show, you would know this. But you got to look out for both camps. And I remember tweeting this to Pablo Hidalgo a few years ago. I was like, will Star Wars ever have any like required reading? And he said no. It'll just be what people see in the films and whatnot. And now it's like, well, kind of, there are other things that you almost have to read if you want to get the full scope of the story. We're seeing this now with the novelization. Palpatine was a clone. Rey's father was a failed clone.
Hey, man, spoiler alert.
Hey, man, there's screenshots all over Twitter. Don't get mad at me.
I'm kidding.
People are just, they're losing their minds out there.
I don't want to get from Hollywood Studios. So.
Yeah. But yeah, it's always a tough thing. And I think if you explain it in a good way that doesn't take a lot of time, it's like, okay, if you go to this place, you can manipulate time. Okay, that's all I need to know. Don't get into, okay, I have to do this at this exact spot, at this exact time. I can only manipulate these kinds of events. If you start getting that deep into it, people are just going to check out. And that's why I think Rebels did it in a really smart way, because once Ezra walks into that portal and you hear Obi-Wan, you hear Jin, you hear Kylo, Rey, all these voices, and you're like, okay, this is part of a bigger picture. This ties into the movies. This isn't just for this event. If you do it that way, I think people will be more open to it. But again, I think you just have to bridge that gap of, even though it's a cartoon, it matters. Even though it's a comic book or a book, it matters to the overall story. Then once you bridge that gap, I think people will be okay with it.
Mm-hmm. And I think, I always say Star Wars is such a vast galaxy of stories and characters that I think it all matters, because it's all related when it comes down to it. I do feel bad because, like you said, David, I do kind of think it's a bad thing now that Star Wars does have required reading in order to understand some of the stories that have been put out. You bring up that point, obviously, that, now the novelization has things that we learn from the book that we should have learned in the film. And I think the films should always come first as far as a larger narrative, and the books kind of fill in the gaps afterwards. But, I don't know. It's a tough sell. It's, and obviously with Star Wars being so old, there's a lot of history in between the lines that it's difficult. Not that it's difficult to surprise people, but it's difficult to bring all that together to make sense of it. And there has to be one cohesive, power to kind of rail it all in.
Real quick, bro. You made a point on the podcast or the live stream the other night when we were doing the live stream with David on Followers of the Force, and you were talking about the fact that they were working right up until the bell, and so you didn't really see there being a JJ cut. But I think that they were working right up until the bell on scenes that may or may not have made it into the final film, and I think the book is maybe exposing some of that. So I agree with you that I think they had a plan to deliver a bunch of content. I think the JJ cut may have filled in some of the gaps that we saw in the final finished film, because that's what as I work my way through the audiobook, I'm getting details in there that were omitted or not properly expressed through the film, and that maybe an extra 20 or 30 minutes of time on that film. I mean, we know that Avengers Endgame, or not Avengers Endgame, but Infinity War, proved to us that you can have a 3-hour film, and you can, if it's edited properly, you can have a 3-hour film that doesn't feel like a 3-hour film. And I was really expecting that with The Rise of Skywalker, and that's not what we ended up getting. parts of it felt super rushed. And I wonder if that is because there was editing done after JJ quote unquote finished the film. And it was to remove things that maybe someone didn't think was necessary, but in the end game, pardon the pun, maybe would have made things make more sense to those of us who are like the hardcore Star Wars fans.
Yeah. I'm going to put something up here from somebody in the chat. And we can talk about that. It's this has always been my contention. I mean, I want to be able to see a film and understand it, not have to see a film, question it, and then go over to the local bookstore and say, oh, okay, that's what they meant. I don't know. I don't remember ever having to do that with a film up until the sequel trilogy happened. And obviously The Force Awakens, I think, was a little different because it was the first in this new story. And I expected some of those answers to be, some of those questions to be answered in the middle part of the story. But that didn't happen. But as far as like a 3-hour cut, I mean, the same studio that did, the Avengers film at 3+ hours or whatever, why didn't it happen for Star Wars? I mean, they were basically kind of under the same roof. If they had the footage or if they were able to tell the story a little bit more cohesively, at the end of the day, why didn't they just release a longer film? Thoughts? Anybody?
I don't know. I mean,
go for it, guys.
I mean, I think when you compare Marvel and Lucasfilm, I mean, I think they've shown that they have two very different ways of doing business, despite being under the same umbrella. And that not that they should do everything exactly the same, but when something works for one, you should take a look at it and see if it'll work for you too.
It's not against the rules to do things the same if it works.
I think the biggest difference is that Marvel obviously had a plan. They obviously knew where they wanted their story to end. They obviously knew how they wanted to get there, and they knew the biggest players to get that done, who they would be. I think that's the biggest issue with the sequel trilogy. You look at The Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, and then Rise of Skywalker, and it's not so much that it's disjointed. I just think that there are just different ways you could have done it and easier ways you could have done it. Keep Rey a nobody. I mean, people always talk about, it's this novel idea that Rey's a nobody. Look at all the Jedi. Aside from the Skywalker family, have we ever asked, where does Ahsoka come from? Where does Plo Koon come from? Where does Obi-Wan come from? No, they're all nobodies. They were taken as kids, trained as Jedi, and they're guardians of the galaxy. No pun intended there. But it's you want to keep the story simple, and I think when you add the whole Rey Palpatine thing. It's the twist that everybody was looking for in maybe The Last Jedi, and they didn't get it. And I don't know. It was just so obvious to me that they were kind of seeing what would work on set while they were making the movie. And you've heard Ian McDermott talk about there was some stuff in the script before they changed it. So there were different versions of the script while they were making the movie. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm sure that happens with a lot of movies. You have new ideas, you want to change some things, that's fine. But such crucial plot points like that I think you just could have done a little differently. And then when we're talking about required reading, you have the whole backstory of Ben Solo that a lot of people don't know that make that character completely different. Everything that he was accused of, if you read that 4-issue comic, pretty much there's a whole different side to the story.
Yeah.
And you look at the guy and now you just feel sorry for him. And now people are going to think that watch the movies, they're still going to think he destroyed the temple. It was his idea. It was always what he wanted to do. And, Charles Soule comic, he proves that a lot of this was out of his control. He was being manipulated the entire time. Same way Anakin was by Palpatine. So, I don't know. I just think if they wanted to keep it as a coherent story, as always we were talking about on Wednesday, George oversaw the original trilogy despite having 3 different directors. He oversaw the prequels, having complete control. You needed somebody for these 3 to oversee everything, give it to 3 different filmmakers, but make sure the story connects. And unfortunately, that didn't happen to the extent that we probably would have wanted it to.
The other thing to
You know
keep
what? When I hear that out loud, David, it really pisses me off because it's like Disney had one frickin' job,
Yeah.
and to be able to screw that up so royally,
Yeah.
it's like it really is a once in a lifetime opportunity to bring this franchise to a whole new level that perhaps it has never been to, because now it's it's Disney's property. They've got the unlimited resources to make an amazing film, and obviously it made money. The stockholders are happy, I would assume.
Yeah.
It made billions. And not to say, I'm not going to sit here and say, well, it could have made a lot more, Mr. Disney, but I think at the end of the day, their bills are paid. Everyone's happy. It is a business, and as a business, I'm going to mention something that somebody in the chat, Phoenix Night Flame, they had a shorter film. I'll read it. They had a shorter film because they wanted to have as many showings at the theaters each day. They knew that Rise of Skywalker wasn't going to be as good as Endgame, so they went with more showings in order to generate more ticket sales. That's an interesting comment. And I think that really, shows you how deep the comment of it's a business, and unfortunately, it is what it is. But to your point, David, I think they could have approached this a better way. Step back and say, look, we got Star Wars now. Let's make it great. Let's plan it all out. We've got 3 stories to tell. Let's do this. Some justice here, and it just didn't happen.
Yeah.
I'm going to rebut that on 2 fronts. On Phoenix's comments, I respect what they're saying. 2 things. First and foremost, to the earlier point, Marvel had the advantage of having most of these storylines laid out previous to them making the films. They changed them, and they went different directions with some of them, but they had a basic idea of how a Thanos series was going to play out. That was not breaking new ground. It was just them taking what happened and altering it. Whereas with Star Wars, it was basically new ground, unless they want to go with George Lucas and his approach to it, which, again, Disney spent $4 billion acquiring Lucasfilm from Lucas. I think they wanted to kind of have some say in the direction the films were going to go. With regards to The Rise of Skywalker, I'm not saying that they're wrong or that Phoenix is wrong in terms of, what's Rob drinking? A bottle of monkey shoulder the size of my head. And that was full when I started. So
Very nice.
I'm also 6'4" and about 315. So we're going to go ahead and say that I can soak it up. But thanks, bro. I got prepped earlier. God damn you. No, but I mean, with regards to the reasons that Disney may or may not have chosen to go that route, and again, I mentioned this in the live stream that we did with David and a few other podcasts earlier in the week. I think that they spent $4 billion acquiring the Skywalker or the Star Wars franchise, and it's not going to be good business for them to make films that fail. So were focus groups and that type of thing involved in the final product of what we got for Rise of Skywalker? I think it absolutely was. Whether that also translated into a shorter film that they could get more showings out of, you could argue that as well. But I don't know. I think that what they're looking forward to right now is starting this new Project Luminous and the High Republic era, where they can get into stories that are completely distanced from the Skywalker saga, which is what they've been successful with since they took over Lucasfilm.
Sure, yeah, we see Mandalorian, great success. People are excited about the new shows on Disney Plus. Andrew, Marisha, you guys read a lot. I know Andrew does. What are you guys expecting from Project Luminous? And I know we just had a discussion on the last Scare podcast, but for our friends who may not have not listened to that episode, what are you guys expecting from Project Luminous? I'll go all the way around here.
Okay, so I guess what I really want to see, having been a fan of the expanded universe,
Forever.
and knowing, and the advantage that the writers had in the expanded universe was telling stories in an era where they didn't have to dance around movies or TV.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that all these things we've been talking about, where the books are now becoming more critical to the movies, I do think that Lucasfilm sees that, and that is part of why they're pushing a large group of their writers to a new era where they don't have to tell stories that are part of this ongoing cinematic or TV storyline, where they have more freedom to create and tell the stories with less hindrance. And so as far as what we're going to get, I don't really know what to expect. I'm excited about Charles Soule and Kevin Scott and Claudia Gray telling stories in this era. I've particularly Claudia Gray. Claudia Gray has done no wrong so far. I don't expect her to at this point. And so, yeah, that's what I want to see with it, is them go back to the days of telling stories where when we go read a novel, we get to read something that's totally unrelated to the films.
Where the publisher and Lucasfilm is handing them and do this and this and this. Like, we heard Timothy Zahn talk about writing the second Thrawn book in the new trilogy, and they were like, and we want you to write about Batu, and we want you to use Darth Vader, and we want you to do. They like had a list of things that he needed to include in his story, and in effect, it's not my favorite of the series, and I think that they have a lot of their writers have really been hemmed in by things. You can't write about this because like Timothy Zahn can't write about Thrawn anymore because Filoni might want to use the character right in Rebels. So there's a lot of. And so that's mostly what I'm excited to see, is just the writers be able to really tell their own stories, tell Star Wars. And I'm excited to see Claudia Gray actually talk about some of the things that were discussed in like the Obi-Wan book. Not the Obi-Wan book, the Master and Apprentice. Yeah. Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon. So they actually like reference the High Republic. So I'd like to go back and hear the stories behind actually when some of these prophecies were made. I think we may get to see some of that. So that's what I'm excited for.
That's interesting. Charlie, are you a big reader? Are you excited for Project Luminous?
Huge. I think that the option for rebooting the entire story arc is going to be exciting. And if we have some carryover characters, that's fine as well. But I'm looking for a new starting line where we can all jump into the story and experience it all together for the first time together.
Yeah, definitely. Cam Ray on screen. Project Luminous is a great step in the correct direction for Disney. I talked about bringing the Star Wars story way in the future, just to see new things. Obviously, they're bringing it in the back to share stories from long ago. David, what do you think about stories way in the future? I know a lot of people are like, let's just get away from what we know. Because it's too controversial. We don't want to see a lot of that stuff changed. It's close to our heart. What do you think about Star Wars? Do you think that going forward is better, or just continuing to go back and reach for stories in the history of Star Wars?
At this point, and this is my personal opinion, I don't care if it's way in the future or way in the past. I think the High Republic is a testing ground for that question right now. I think having it with publishing, I think it's a little easier. But what I think they're doing is they're saying, okay, We don't know if anybody's really going to be up for a story hundreds of years into the future or thousands of years into the past. Let's make it 400, something where if you want to see Yoda, he's around. It's not too much of a departure from what we know. If people like that, we can go into the Old Republic 1,000 years before the Phantom Menace. If people really like that, we can go 1,000 years into the future. You have to make people comfortable with seeing stories that they're not familiar with first, in a scale where you can really draw out characters, you can really have a plan in place. Because Lucasfilm has said the High Republic isn't going to tie into any movie, TV show, video game, nothing like that. If it succeeds, they can say, maybe we'll do a show based on these characters. They now have stuff to draw from, places, events, other characters that they've interacted with, and they can use that there. They have a plan now. They're not just creating things on the fly. And again, if that succeeds, they can go for an Old Republic or Way in the Future. And maybe that's ultimately what that Benioff and Weiss trilogy is going to be. The rumors it was going to be the origin of the Jedi. They can wait. Hopefully it's still that 2022 release date. If not, they can wait a little bit in the future. And this gives them time because these stories come out in August. They'll have about 2 years to get on board with this kind of Star Wars storytelling. And if it hits, it'll hit on the big screen.
Yeah, Rob, what do you think? Forward or backwards? And while you answer that question, I'm going to go get another beer.
Bring me one.
Yeah, I had to go get
I'm
ice.
going to go get a drink too.
Charles is falling out of sync. He pointed out that every time I drink, he takes a drink. So you're one behind, sir.
It's a new game.
I told you I was covering Andrew Amerska. So, yeah, the thing is, as far as way forward or way back, I love the Old Republic time period, and I actually think that even if they don't want to do like a live action series, I think that the way that they did the cutscenes for the Old Republic game, I could watch an entire series in that style. The cutscenes were incredible. The characters were compelling, and that was cutscenes. So I would love to see something in the style of the Old Republic, like the game cutscenes. I think there's a lot of time periods that they could cover that would be really compelling. They wouldn't have to worry so much about getting big name actors. They could do what they've done successfully in the past, which is to get some great voice talent and just do some amazing work with the graphics that they've developed. And it would be a wonderful addition to what we've got out there currently. Welcome back, Ro.
Thank you. So yeah, Charles, did I ask you this? We already talked about that, didn't we?
Yeah, that's okay.
No, but it's some of the authors that are on that list for Project Luminous, and I told you guys up there at Coruscant Radio Underground. I'm not a big reader, but I have read some of Claudia Gray's books, and they're fantastic. Kevin Scott, Charles Soule. I'm very excited to read what he has to offer. I've been, following him from the comic books, and those are some great stories. But yeah, it's always interesting when we get new Star Wars. I'm kind of excited. Just like I said to you, Rob, a while ago when we were talking about, right before The Rise of Skywalker was released, I said I am cautious. I'm shitless. I don't know what we're going to expect with new Star Wars. But David, you had a point. I think this is going to be kind of a testing ground for the fans' interest to see if going forward, if they do films. Obviously, if it's a huge success and they want to do movies, the stage is set, and they can go ahead and pick and choose and see what they want to do. If it's not a success, then I guess it's going to have to, they're going to have to kind of go back to ground zero and figure some things out. Somebody had mentioned in the chat that one of the stipulations for the sale of Lucasfilm was that they had to finish off the Skywalker saga. I'm not sure, if there's any truth to that. I think it would be illogical to think that they wouldn't finish the Skywalker saga, since before the sale, I think George Lucas was the one that kind of, brought the old actors back and used that as a bargaining chip to sell the franchise now that they had them. Unfortunately, I don't think they were, utilized properly because, whatever. But still, it's a very interesting thing to think of. What else is going on in the world of Star Wars, guys?
Oh man. Well, one thing I did want to ask you guys about. Y'all remember when, I think it was the Hollywood Reporter, they ran a story about a new not solo film, but a new Star Wars movie. Yeah. A new Star Wars movie directed by J.D. Dillard and one of the writers from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and Luke Cage. That story went out. It honestly didn't make a lot of noise, and it went away after like a day. And then it just was never brought up again. Now, that reminded me a lot of the old Kenobi story that was ran like 2 years ago, when they're like, okay, a Kenobi movie is happening. Stephen Daldry is directing. Ewan McGregor's coming back. That we heard nothing about that ever again. Again, by the Hollywood Reporter. So, do we think that's even happening? Do we think they just jumped the gun announcing it? Or is it dead because of just lack of interest?
Yeah, I think sometimes I don't know who said it. We were talking to some folks, and they were talking about how Lucasfilm is using social media to kind of test the waters, and it almost seems like that is a tactic of that.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because I mean, they're putting the risk of ticking some directors off if it's not the case, if they aren't actually doing it. So I think one of the reasons it died is because I think, wasn't the director tied to some independent movie that a lot of people really didn't hear about? Yeah,
Slight was the movie.
And it's like, I don't know. I've never heard of the movie. I've never seen the film. I've never heard anybody talk about the film. And I think bringing in an independent director to helm another Star Wars, I don't think they want to do that again.
Yeah. Who knows?
But and we were supposed to get some announcement at the end of January or February about a new director, and that also never happened. So I think these are really interesting times to be living as Star Wars fans. I think we have to kind of all, take a lot of Star Wars news with a grain of salt, because I don't even think they know what is happening. Like you said, this publishing project is really going to be kind of a testing ground for Disney and Star Wars going forward, just to see where the fans are at. But I got to tell you, whoever's in charge of Star Wars on the small screen, I think that's the answer. Even after The Last Jedi, for me, I was a lot more excited about Star Wars on the small screen than I was on the big screen. And that's sad, because Star Wars obviously was a big ticket item for me. It's the reason why we are all here after 4 decades. But we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens.
It bears noting, though, that times are changing, right? So when Star Wars first began, it was about going to the theater. You were kind of hostage to the theater in terms of when that film was going to be playing. You couldn't get it on home video. You didn't have forums to talk about it on. You didn't have podcasts to listen to. And as times have changed, and now it's available to get all these things on demand, or you can buy the digital copy and you can watch it 500 times, as Rebel Force Radio always likes to point out. At this point, and even by the end of the original trilogy, Star Wars was no longer this kind of cutting edge franchise. It was beginning to become its own conglomerate, its own corporation, and it was about the merchandising above all else. And it started to become less about bucking the establishment, which is what George Lucas originally was setting out to do, and more about becoming part of that establishment. Disney is a continuation of that. Disney is going to approach this as they would any other investment. They're going to put ideas out there and wait and kind of see what feedback they get from the public. They don't do this just with Star Wars. They do this with their resorts, with their parks, with everything that they do. They'll put surveys out there about resorts or parks or whatever, and wait and see what the feedback is from their audience before determining a path forward. And so it is what it is. I mean, it's been a long time since Star Wars was the pure and uncorrupted thing that you and I recall, maybe Ro, from our youth. And so, it's a sign of the times. I'm hopeful that they do what they have done in the past, which is to still tell compelling stories, which again aligns very well with Disney. Walt was all about telling compelling stories as well. And if they want to kind of keep that moving forward, we should be able to get some good Star Wars in the future.
But that's an interesting statement, though, because obviously the George Lucas's empire was built on merchandising and selling toys.
Yep.
And he was smart enough to kind of look at that and say, the only way that I can continue to making these films is not by selling tickets to the movie, but by the licensing agreements that I make to sell these toys. And if you can look behind me and any other podcaster that is out there, you're going to see that this franchise was built on fans exactly like us that are responsible for scooping up all of these wonderful toys. So I think the difference here, obviously Disney is a huge company. It's a big conglomerate. And how ironic is it that George Lucas, who wanted to stay away from that from the beginning and established his production universe away from Hollywood, away from the suits, ends up selling it to the biggest suit on the planet.
Not that surprising, really, when you realize the past of George Lucas. I mean, his family went to Disneyland Resort the second day it was open. His dad took him there.
Wow.
And in the making of the original Star Wars film book by Jonathan Rinsler, he is very clear about the fact that, Walt was someone that Lucas looked up to in terms of being a storyteller, which Lucas very much felt like he was as well. And if he were to ever give up his universe that he created, it was going to be to someone like Walt, who had a similar mindset. So I think that Disney getting Lucasfilm was something that was very much in line with what both Walt and Lucas would have expected. It's just that what Disney is today is different than what both of them would thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
And there's there's really there's a balance between the business side of filmmaking and the creative side of filmmaking that a lot of people really don't understand. These big companies are responsible for making sure that the money that is put into these films is multiplied. Take Sonic, the situation that happened with Sonic. They put out that screen grab or that test animation, and people on the internet went nuts and said that doesn't look like Sonic. And the studios kind of shut down for a while to kind of rework that and listen to the fans. There were some fans that said that was a bad thing, a bad precedent to have been able to have done because a filmmaker should express his or her own perception of the project, the character, whatever it is that they're doing. But at the same time, folks have to realize that it's a business. And if you want artsy fartsy films, head on over to Southport here in Chicago and check out some films at the Music Box Theater. But for tentpole films like Star Wars, you really have to kind of ease off on that artsy fartsy stuff because you're out there to make money. But at the same time, you should be able to tell a compelling story. that makes money for you as a company. Where do you guys, what do you guys think about that balance between, art and business? Charles, I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
I think it's tough. I think that the a perfect example from my perspective is the our family when we before we watched The Rise of Skywalker, we did as much as we could of a rewatch of all the movies and the series. So I plucked out some of the most important uh, Clone Wars and Rebels episodes that would lead us into the Rise of Skywalker movie. And the appetite for watching these movies and TV series was, I guess, small in the sense that, well, if I have to watch all of these different pieces to understand a movie in a theater, we're not into it. So I had to cut back and, okay, what's the most important pieces that we can look at and watch and then sort of absorb for the movie. The once we walked into the theater, they had their various interpretations of the movie. They enjoyed it. They didn't enjoy it. Um, the challenge, I think, for the casual viewer for Disney in a larger sense is that if you imbue most of your story or a huge part of your story within the secondary and tertiary parts of the story in the book or in a comic book or in an animated series, you're going to lose those core viewers where they feel completely lost. And I think that if the core of the story is delivered in a sense that most people can get it and understand it and enjoy it, you've got a future. If not, it's going to be a tough sell.
Yeah, definitely. Um, it's definitely a delicate balance.
Mm-hmm.
Andrew, Marisha, what do you guys think about that balance between business and art? It's a tough one, right?
I mean, art's a commodity. It always has been. It's something that the artist does, but there has to be somebody to buy it or to at least fund it. I mean, even looking back at some of the greatest artists, during the Renaissance, people would, the church came in and told freaking Leonardo da Vinci, no, you can't paint angel wings like that. You have to do it differently. I mean, he's like one of the most brilliant minds ever, one of the most creative, but it's that's the thing about art.
Yeah, I mean, it's there needs to be both. I mean, there's certainly validity to creating your art for your own outlet
for you.
But when you're creating something to sell tickets, to put people in seats, to sell products, sometimes you have to listen. Now with this Sonic the Hedgehog movie, I mean, they took a huge risk. They obviously had a lot of they were obviously felt good about what they had as far as a movie to step back and spend the money to go do a redesign on the character. But it turns out the movie was pretty good. People might have overlooked some of the dislike of the character. So whether it did them a lot of good or not, I don't know. But it was certainly, I think a lot of people certainly opened up to the idea of going to see that movie because the company stepped back and looked at it. But then there
were a lot of people that went to see the movie almost as a thank you for listening to us.
Right.
I'm going to go spend the money and see the movie.
So I mean, you have to, but I mean, you look at it. One I always go to is Stan Lee, who spent years creating work designed by other people, told how to do it by other people. And before he quit, he was ready to be done. His wife said, write one book the way you want to do it. And he created the Fantastic Four. Mm-hmm. So there's certain validity to both sides of this.
Sure.
Yeah.
Jesus, can someone please make a decent Fantastic Four movie?
Hey, there's some rumors about that. So
again, you started talking about classic artists and I almost went into Westworld. So
David, what do you think?
Yeah, that balance obviously it always has to be there, and you always have to take it into account. One thing I always the comparison I always make is when you listen to one of your favorite artists, and they put on an album, it's your favorite album, then you get the next one, and it probably sounds completely different, and you're just like, wait, why aren't you doing the thing that we all supported you on? Why don't these songs have the same sound? Why don't they have the same, riffs that we liked in the previous album and all this stuff? And I think you got to remember a lot of the time, a lot of these artists, if they're not doing it true to themselves, I don't feel like they're really creating anything that of any value. And I think that I saw that a lot with The Last Jedi. And I think it's the reason why I really like the movie is because Ryan Johnson, obviously a huge Star Wars fan, he made a movie that he really liked. And I know, Ro, we can battle this out right after I say this. But he made a movie that he felt he really liked, but also I think he didn't allow his own fandom to kind of get in the way of it. And I feel like that is a thing you have to do sometimes. If I directed a Star Wars movie, if I directed The Rise of Skywalker, that final scene where Rey is doing the whole "be with me" thing, I would have gone full Return of the King. I would have had Anakin, Mace, Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, all his Force ghosts right behind Rey, getting ready to go at the Emperor. And that's how I would have done it, just because I love that scene in Return of the King. It would have been kind of cool to see everybody as a Force ghost. But again, then you're just taking away from her own path within the story. Now you're saying, okay, she only did this because she had all these Jedi behind her and helping her within this moment. And in a way they did. But I feel like you just always have to take into account, even though you have all these ideas and stuff, you always have to go with what is best for the story. And sometimes that means compromising something that you would have done, but without losing the soul of it. And I feel like at the end of the day, as long as you still have your soul, I guess, when creating art or creating anything, I think you win at the end. So yeah, I love The Last Jedi, by the way, Rod. I don't know if you knew that.
Ryan Johnson is such a divisive personality. I can't, as I said on your on your live stream the other night, David, I would not tell anyone they're wrong for liking what they like.
Mm-hmm.
But I had a completely different reaction to it.
Yeah.
And I think, look, but that's the thing about Star Wars.
Yeah,
you're allowed to feel the way you want to feel about it, as long as you have reasons for why you want to justify how you feel about it. Who am I to tell you you're wrong?
Right. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing. Whenever we don't like a movie, like you, for example, do you constantly tweet about the Fantastic Four on a daily basis and tag every actor that's been associated with the movie, just incessantly just harassing them? No, you don't.
I do, yeah.
Oh, you do? Okay. and I'm just going to leave it at that. No, but, you don't do it because you realize, look, I didn't like the movie. That's fine. So leave it at that, and
yeah, it's funny that you say that, David, because like the other, I think a while earlier today, I was reading somebody's tweet about The Last Jedi, and sometimes I'll still respond to somebody in a snarky way, not I'm not an a-hole about it, but again, getting back to your point, David, I'm sitting there, I'm like, I'll be typing it, I'm like, do I really want to go there? Nah, I'm over it.
Yeah.
Swipe right, and then
right.
I just don't do it.
Right.
And obviously, listeners to the Scuttlebutt podcast, everybody knows how we feel about The Last Jedi, and we didn't like it per se.
Yeah.
But we still love Star Wars, and we still love what it does, and we're still obviously talking about it.
Yeah.
But to your point, that thing about not liking a movie and tagging all the actors, ad nauseum, and saying that you suck and this and that.
Yeah.
I think that's like a whole different aspect of not even the fandom, but
right.
At that point, it's just a ludicrous, crazy
right.
thing that those people do just for clicks, and I don't even. It's just a goofy thing.
Yeah,
A
and
little
I think
more.
what bothers me the most are just the personal attacks at Ryan Johnson, and now you're seeing the personal attacks at J.J. Abrams and Chris Terrio.
Oh
It's
yeah,
like,
yeah.
look, don't like the movie. That's fine. When I left The Force Awakens the first time, I came out thinking that, I wish it would have been more like The Phantom Menace with more lightsaber action, with more, a lot more stuff going on. And then obviously later on, I forgot about that and I just liked the movie. But with Ryan Johnson, when I met him at Celebration Orlando in 2017, the guy going to the hall at 2 in the morning, signing everybody's badges, talking to everybody, just a super nice guy. And it's like, okay, you didn't like the movie that he made, but don't go after the guy's character. I mean, he's never done anything to you. Same way JJ's never done anything to you either. They made a movie that they thought was a fitting end to this 40-year saga. If you didn't like it, that's fine. I challenge you to answer every question to satisfy every fan. That's been in this world for 40 years. You're not going to do it. I'm sorry.
I agree.
And
Never do that.
you're never going to do it. And
You're never going to do that. The issue that I take with Ryan Johnson is that I have heard the people. Look, I've never been to a celebration. I'm exposing myself as a person who some people would say you don't deserve to be a Star Wars podcaster if you've never been to Star Wars Celebration. Right? Fair enough. There are people that would make that argument. So it doesn't change the fact that I've been a Star Wars fan since the first movie came out. With Ryan Johnson, I would argue that the fact that he was so buddy with the fans is the fact that he wanted them to like him and his film, regardless of whether it meshed with the rest of Star Wars. That is my opinion.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna sit there and contradict someone else who feels differently about it because ultimately it's my opinion.
Yeah.
I don't know the truth of the matter. So I approach it from where I'm coming from. If someone says I love The Last Jedi and I hate the Rise of Skywalker, then I respect that opinion on the merits of the fact that they have something to support saying that. If they don't, then that's something to call into question. But there's an equal argument that can be made about the fact that there are people that don't like the Rise of Skywalker because the fact that it feels rushed or it feels disjointed from The Last Jedi. And the question is, where does the fault lie in that? And it goes back to what we talked about earlier. Lucas was the master of the original trilogy. He was the master of the prequel trilogy. With the original trilogy, he had different directors directing each film, but he was driving the story. That was what caused, I think, the sequel trilogy to be so disjointed, was the fact that there was not a unified agreement about where there was no one driving where it was going. And so who is quote unquote at fault for that? You could have that argument all day long. I'm not willing to sit there and say, I don't love Star Wars because I disagree with one film or the other film.
Yeah.
It's not worth it.
Right.
It's you're arguing one film out of a total of 9. So I'm looking forward to where they're going with it in the future. I hope that they go in a direction that's kind of in line with what we've seen with The Mandalorian and Rogue One and some of the other independent quote unquote Star Wars films. But ultimately, I love Star Wars. I mean, the fact that 40 plus years later we're still sitting here talking about this stuff tells me it is a phenomenon the likes of which we have not seen, with the exception of something along the lines of a Star Trek that has been there since our parents were potentially watching this stuff. And the fact that is something that we can sit here and talk about when we're all on lockdown in our homes because of a virus, right? I respect everyone and every opinion out there. And if you don't agree with me, that doesn't mean you're a bad person. It just means that, we have a different viewpoint, and I'm okay with that.
One of the things that, hold on, I had to prepare myself here.
Let's all take a drink. Here we go.
No, so I know you guys have heard the interview with Mr. Johnson talking about how he really doesn't care about the history and the lore and the world building. Well, he didn't say the lore, but the world building definitely came into play. Unfortunately, I feel that for me and the portrayal of The Last Jedi as a film, that statement really says a lot to me as far as how he approached this film. I think again, if you're doing an independent film and this is a brand new story and everybody seems to be liking the Knives Out because it's such an original story, and that's great. I told my wife she wanted to see Knives Out the other day because it was on demand, and I said Knives Out is banned in our household, so don't even think about it. But one of the things that I feel that was wrong of him to approach was to not really care about the world building in that universe. I mean, that universe was built on world building, and if you're not going to pay attention to that as another element of the narrative in your chapter of your story, I feel is doing a huge disservice to not only the fans that have been watching that story unfold for all these years, but to the overall storytelling of that middle chapter. And as a filmmaker, I respect what he did, but as a filmmaker for a Star War, I don't think that was the right approach, because Star Wars has such a vast history before this film that if you're not going to take any of that other stuff into account, then why even bother doing a Star Wars film?
Yeah, I mean, somebody else can go ahead. I know I've taken this question the last 2 times.
I mean, I have one thought on the world building thing, and as a longtime fan of fantasy writing, going back to people like uh, Herbert, who wrote the Dune series, and Tolkien and Lewis, fantasy storytelling is world building. Like it's about continually building your world when you're building a world that's different than the world we actually exist in. But I would say that, and I see somebody kind of said the same thing in the chat, there wasn't a lot of world building anywhere in the sequel trilogy. I would say The Rise of Skywalker has the most world building as far as creating things that were new. The Force Awakens, while it is a new story, introduces new characters, was very much intentionally built on the back of A New Hope. But I would actually say, that The Last Jedi is really, in a lot of ways, built on the back of Empire. It follows a lot of the same narratives. It ends differently, but a lot of people acted like the idea of telling a story about failure was something new in Star Wars, but Empire's a story about failure. And so I don't know. I feel like that may have been one of the big things that was missing in this new trilogy altogether, was just world building.
Yeah.
And that's, I understand that that's a difficult thing. You have these people like Tolkien, who literally couldn't finish a book because he spent the rest of his life building the world that his stories were set in. And once the original creator is not handling it anymore, the world building kind of ceased, except for in the case of Dave Filoni. Which is why I say that Dave Filoni is the heir apparent in a lot of ways to George Lucas, and that he is the only one that has continued the world building that you would expect in a fantasy series.
Here.
Yeah.
Look, and I'm not saying that Dave Filoni does not have a bridge to cross when it comes to live action stuff.
Oh, he does.
Yeah, he absolutely does. He is the director of the series or of the episode within Mandalorian season 1 where they dealt with the gunslinger, and that was arguably the weakest of the season 1 episodes of the Mandalorian. I'd be interested to see how that kind of pans out, whose boots those were. But we shall see.
Yeah.
Filoni's not afraid to play the long game when he
No.
tells stories. So
Right.
Oh, definitely, and that's one of the things that is really exciting to me is waiting to see what that long story is going to be, and obviously with the Darksaber coming into play, there's going to be a lot there in season 2. I think I almost think that they were kind of holding back in season 1 just to kind of obviously introducing these characters and bringing out some of the story elements. Now that we are heading into a second season of that show, I think all the gloves are going to be off. Dave Filoni obviously responsible for a lot of the great story arcs in the projects that he's been involved with. Bringing all that stuff to live action is going to be very exciting. The siege on Mandalore might come into play. All that stuff with the Darksaber, who knows? Somebody had posted a while ago that wouldn't it be cool to see Darth Maul as part of this story for season 2 in The Mandalorian? I'm not sure if I think he's alive during this timeline, if I'm correct. But it definitely is very interesting to see.
who Maul? Maul would be dead.
At this time?
Yeah. For the Mandalorian?
Yeah.
Yeah, Maul dies just prior to episode 4.
Yeah.
So
almost 10 years prior.
Right. So it's still interesting just to see all this stuff kind of come into the fold when it comes to live action, especially because Dave Filoni, has brought us some really great and interesting stories, in Clone Wars and Rebels and all that stuff. And like Rob was saying, a protege of George Lucas from the get-go. So very exciting. University of Coruscant says Maul is coming back. He survived again.
I will say that the spoiler alert. I have to be careful. Obi-Wan may not have cut him in half. He's quartered him, I guess, at this point. Right.
Yeah.
What do you guys think of bringing cartoon characters into the real world? And David, I know we talked a little bit about Rogue One. Saw Gerrera was, I think if I'm not mistaken, he was George Lucas's original pick to kind of bring in to live action from the cartoons. I think Forrest Whitaker is a very talented actor, very, just a precise way of his expression of whatever character he's playing. I've seen him in other films, obviously, and he's just fantastic. A lot of people have issues with Saw Gerrera and his with Forrest Whitaker and his portrayal of Saw, but obviously being familiar with his character and coming from that and seeing him in real life in Rogue One was just a treat. What do you guys think about bringing characters that we see in 2D and bringing them, to life in the action in full action here?
I mean, I love it. I think that it expands the absorption of the different mediums or media that they have, whether there is, if someone who likes the animated series and if they start appearing in live action, it brings the different narrative and the different storytelling parts into the live action, and I love it. I think it's the epitome of intratextual style of character development, and it almost rewards people who are more into reading or watching animated series, bring them into live action. It only serves to enhance the different types of media that Disney works in. And hey, look, if you like a character in a book, who knows? In the future, that character may show up in a live action series or vice versa.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to see, as far as The Mandalorian, I expect to see, I'm still holding out some hope that Katie Sackhoff is going to be in this next season. She has hinted several times as to having fulfilled a dream that she has not said another word about on her Twitter. And as far as bringing in animated characters, and if we're going to see if the rumors revolving around Ahsoka are true because of their connection in the story currently, I fully expect that we'll see Sabine as well.
Now that would be fantastic. Talking about actors portraying cartoon characters, who would you guys see as Sabine? David?
It depends. Is she going to take the helmet off anyway?
Right.
I mean, that's what I want to see in The Mandalorian. I want to see, by the end of season 2, I want the story to reach the point where the Mandalorians are ready to come out of hiding.
Hey, Sabine is pre-helmet on.
True. But is that not the rule for all Mandalorians now? So I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah.
But I want there are a lot of characters that I think as long as Dave Filoni is involved, you're going to keep seeing characters jump from animation to live action.
Yeah.
I almost feel like the whole rule about not taking the helmet off was told to the Mandalorian by this group of Mandalorians to keep his identity a secret. I think later on we're going to find out that his character is somebody very, very important, and he's not just any old orphan that was rescued from some sort of attack. Because everybody's saying, like, well, Sabine takes her helmet off. I mean, other Mandalorians have taken their helmet off. What's the big deal? So
It's after the purge.
Right. So,
It's after the Mandalorian purge.
We'll see.
Again, which I agree. I don't think they've established that well enough. I think that when they talk about the purge, that most Star Wars fans are going to think Jedi purge.
Yeah.
But clearly there was a purge on Mandalore, or any of the associated.
Well, you can't leave. I mean, you purged your 2 largest warrior races. Your 2 largest group. You purged the Jedi because they're a threat. Yeah. You would purge the Mandalorians for the same reason.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
You're a wise man, Andrew. I don't care if your wife left you.
It's a beer run.
Yeah.
No, it's a liquor that I was displaying on screen.
It's pretty fantastic. This film, 40 plus years, and we're still kind of picking it apart. And that's the power of these characters, old and new, from all corners of the franchise, comic books, the cartoons, the animated series, the films. There has been, obviously, besides the dates, we don't really know what's going to happen with the films going into the future. We've got some release dates, but that's pretty much about it. Supposedly we, like I said earlier, we were supposed to get some sort of news on a new director. But I do like the fact that they're maybe, putting the brakes on stuff a little bit and kind of testing the waters to see. We haven't really seen a lot of what's going on with the folks that are heading up the next phase. I know Michelle Rejwan was in one of the making of extra series when the digital Rise of Skywalker was released. So we'll see what she has to offer the franchise going forward. She was, what's her title? She was the head of live action film and television.
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah. So, I think I also read there's an article, I forgot where, but they were talking about how she was really kind of a protege of J.J. Abrams' camp back in the day during, her work history with him. So, going forward, I think it's great to be able to see some new energy come into play for Star Wars, just to see, what we're going to be talking about for the next 42 years.
Probably still be talking about these past few movies. Tell you that.
Yeah, I mean, David, I know you've had kind of a up and down roller coaster, history with the sequel trilogy. Now
Yeah.
that Rise of Skywalker and this sequel trilogy is out and about. I mean, how has your experience been talking to some of the listeners on your show?
Um, I honestly haven't seen a lot of dissension. I mean, I think what it all boils down to is people love Star Wars, and if it's Star Wars, people are going to like it, and I think that's a great way to look at things. I, we can all dissect a Star Wars movie, pick it apart, talk about things we like, things we don't like, but at the end of the day, I remember when the whole Star Wars rankings thing came out, and people started doing that. I just listed all of them, and I was like, I love every single one of them. They're all tied for number one because that's just the way I look at it. If I start looking at these movies and um, just really look at them as like a Martin Scorsese film that I really have to look at and really think about, then I'm just not really going to enjoy it to its full potential. And I know there's a lot in episodes 1 through 9 that you can really look at and look at the themes and look at how these stories impact um, different people and how they reflect the times in which they were made and what was going on. But yeah, I mean, I will always look at the sequel trilogy as my, as how I got back into Star Wars. Never forget the Force Awakens trailer drop on Thanksgiving of 2014.
Yeah.
I'll never forget Celebration 2017 for the 40th anniversary panel. I'll never forget being in the room for the drop of the Last Jedi trailer and getting that poster. And I'll never forget starting the podcast. I mean, it's been really cool. The last 6 years have really done a lot. It's been a fun ride.
So tell the folks that are still hanging out, followers of the Force, where can we find you guys?
So you can find us on Twitter at FOTF Podcast. We have our episodes come out every Monday at 11 a.m. Our latest episode, which was the podcast hangout that we did on Wednesday, that's available on Anchor, Spotify, and YouTube. Still trying to get it on Apple Podcasts. And we have our interview with Dominic Pace that went up on Wednesday. That's available. And our interview with Michael Morisi, who's writing the upcoming Clone Wars Battle Tales comic series. So a lot of fun stuff. And Jason and Gwendy held down the fort tonight, recording episode 96. So that one will be out on Monday at 11 a.m.
That's awesome. That's cool.
Yeah.
And Jedi Temple Archives, you are out there informing the public of all things Jedi. Tell us a little bit about what was your last episode about?
It helped if I'm not on mute. But I joined up with Todd Hoffman of WSTR Galactic Public Access. It's a mouthful. To talk a little bit about the Knights of Ren. So we got a chance to have that discussion. It was a good time. Certainly kind of a conglomeration between the information I got from the comics as well as what he had from the Last Jedi visual dictionary. And we got a couple of pins here.
Ooh.
So those
Nice.
of you who have stuck around, we've got a C-3PO and R2-D2 Rise of the Resistance pin, or a Sith Trooper limited release pin. And the question that you need to answer, is everyone ready?
Wait. Okay, go.
Wait. All right. What was the name of Kylo Ren's flagship in The Rise of Skywalker?
And so this is our little version of a live Sentry Mode quiz.
Right.
But,
I feel like Cam's going to get this.
uh-oh.
Go Cam, go Cam.
Go, Cam, go.
Don't make me go into the detailed what weapon was held by this Knights of Ren.
Yeah.
a big knife.
Oh, I like no cheating.
No cheating.
In all
Well,
honesty, I had just listened to this on the Rise of Skywalker audiobook,
nice.
the meat dragon, and I still couldn't get it.
So while people are thinking of the answer, Charles, you got conversations. You and Pat, where can folks find you?
Well, we are at Conversations at on Facebook. We're also at Swations on Twitter, and we also have our Instagram, brand new, at Conversations on Instagram as well. And we are all on the different podcast catchers, and we just published our brand new episode literally tonight, probably 2 hours ago, from our CalusaCon episode where we spoke to a bunch of different Star Wars fans and their stories and their origin stories. And it was fascinating and it was a great time. And if you guys could all listen, that'd be wonderful. And it was a great time.
Awesome. Yeah, it's one of the things that I found, doing this podcast is being able to interact with a lot of people. Obviously, you guys made some really great friends because of Star Wars, and it's very, very rewarding just interacting with folks on Twitter and through the podcast. We've had a lot of fun. Andrew, I know you guys dropped your episode of the Science Fictionary where I gave you a little report on Chicago C2E2, which was a lot of fun to be able to have contributed to your podcast. Where are you guys found?
Okay, you can find our Star Wars show at Coruscant Radio Underground. It's pretty much at this point, pretty much anywhere you look for it: Apple Podcasts, Google, Podbean, YouTube, iHeartRadio, TuneIn Radio. And you can find our other show, the Science Fictionary Podcast, is available on Podbean, iTunes. I think it's popping up on Google Podcasts now. Theirs works a little different, but unless you try to ask Google to load it, if you ask Google to do it, it'll load a different podcast every time. I'm not sure why. Uh, but yeah, that's pretty much where you can find our Twitter at CRU_podcast.
Excellent. Well, guys, thank you very much. I know it's past Marisha's bedtime. That's why she's not in her seat.
Yeah, she's actually running children off to bed. I'm surprised she hasn't come back. Oh, there she comes.
But I know Marisha's got her Twitter account.
They're all in bed.
You got here just in time.
Okay.
To tell us where you could be found online.
Okay. Online. All right. I'm on Twitter. I'm princesses_and_padawans and princessesandpadawans.com. Also mostly on Instagram at princesses_and_padawans. That's me on the internet.
That's awesome. And I was telling Andrew that I just heard your last podcast on the sciencefictionary.com. Pretty good stuff. I love the fact that you guys have two shows.
Yes, it's fun.
This lower third's for you, Marisha. Mana.
Do.
But again, thank you guys so much for joining me and joining our pod people friends over in the chat and online and on Twitter and all that wonderful stuff. It's been a pleasure. It's always great talking to you. I know it's late. We're all yawning and half drunk, so we'll see what happens. Thank you guys. Any last words from anybody? I guess not.
May the force be with you always.
May the force be with you. And if
Go
Alex
Bucks.
were here,
Go Bucks and Tom Brady.
And that's the scuttlebutt.
that's the scuttlebutt. That is correct. Thank you guys in the chat. Make sure to let Rob know what your answer is if you're still thinking about it, but remember, no cheating.
Google's your friend.
Google is your friend at this point. Yeah.
I can tell you right now. And give everybody the answer real quick.
Do it.
Nice.
Do it.
Do it.
Do
I believe it's the finalizer.
No,
It's not. Which one was the finalizer?
it's not the flagship.
Was the
Starts
fi-
with an S.
the
Wait,
the
whose flagship?
finalizer? Kylo.
Who's Kylo Ren's? Oh,
David
And
is
the rest
googling.
Skywalker.
David is googling it.
No, I was not googling it.
hmm.
Nope. And plus, I
Google.
Rob already sent me another thing the other week, so I am not answering this question.
Look at that.
Oh, that's right. I got a new stash of stickers. If anybody wants some Scarab
Yay.
Scuttlebutt stickers,
I need some.
hit me up in the DM.
One.
Let us know, and we'll put those on a Tidarium shuttle and send them off in your direction. Again, this is Ro from the Scare of Scuttlebutt podcast. Deploy the Garrison. Rob, Charles, David, Andrew, Marisha, Captain America Shield. I love that. But thank you guys. Thank you guys again for joining us. It's been a lot of fun as always. We'll have to do it again sometime real soon.
Absolutely.
For sure.
Thank you guys.
Thanks.
Have a great night.